the business needs to keep its competitiveness internationally after this achieving this strategy. Then we want to learn from the global knowledge and experience. That's why we created a partnership with the ETC. But also, we want to contribute to the global discourse of, about how Asian countries, which may have a kind of similar condition with us, to chart the pathway. So there are several important aspects of this exercise, science-based pathway to keep the competitiveness, but also want to learn from the global experience and also to contribute to the global discussion. That's how we created this platform. It's already 3 years on the road that we launched this initiative at the Glasgow COP20 now 6. Then after 3 years, we came up with an interim report. So that's what you will see. And then I would like to now ask that Professor Masakazu Suniyama of University of Tokyo, who is a leading professor of this particular initiative from UTokyo side, to present the outcome of that research. So Professor Suniyama, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
先生、聞こえますか?
Can you hear me? I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Oh.
Yeah, I think we need to volume up a little bit.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. If you have a handset, that may be
Yes,
also helpful.
I'm loud enough. I'm loud enough. I have checked. So I
Okay.
think this is the problem of the audio in the on-site system.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please go ahead because the time is so short.
Okay.
So yeah, Master, please.
Okay. So I hope that at least you can hear me to some extent, right? So let me present our scenario of the net zero energy system in 2050 Japan, and also some challenges towards that realization. So our scenario, net zero Japan 2050, is the description of the potential shape for Japan's future decarbonized energy system as a technologically feasible picture. And also we will use this to discuss about the route of the transition as a backcasting approach. And this is more or less the business as usual scenario under the assumptions like the a moderate decline in the population by 20%, and also the increase in the energy efficiency and the prevalent material circularity, and also some reduction in the export in these industrial sectors like steel and cement. And to make the story very short, here are the pictures depicting the transition of the entire energy demand in Japan in 2019. This is existing picture, and also our perspective in 2050 in the right-hand side. And you can see here, the total energy demand will decrease by almost 45%. And the way of looking at the picture in detail is that the height of the bar in each sector corresponding to the amount of the final energy demand in each sector, and also the lateral axis corresponding to the fraction of the energy supply from the different sources depicted by different color. As you can see here in 2050, it is clear that we will be able to achieve the intensive electrification and also transition of the fuel from the fossil black to the CO2-free fuel, which is hydrogen or ammonia, and also some residual use of the fossil resources in some industrial sectors, but these should be coupled with CCS, and the amount of the usage of the fossil resources should be in a restrained amount. And in this particular picture, the electricity demand will definitely increase by almost 56%. So our challenge is that how to stably supply the electricity to meet this increased energy demand while maintaining the major source of the electricity to be renewable, even in our restricted condition of Japan. And here are some pictures of the power mix in Japan. The left-hand side column is the existing picture, which is mostly sustained by these fossil resources. And the 2050 pictures are here. And the second column is as reference, the another scenario, right scenario. And these four columns are our simulation result, considering the demand-supply balance every hour in 9 segments. And depending on the assumptions, like the rather high price of the PV and wind, and also some restriction of the installation capacity coming from the land area shortage in Japan, we have more law for the fuel firing power generation even in 2050. While if we assume a more drastic decline in the cost of the PV and wind power generations, we will have the more prevalent use of these intermittent renewable energy sources. While we have still some role of the fuel firing power generation, which are the either hydrogen or ammonia, because we need to secure the adjustability of the electricity power generation. And in these scenarios where the PV and wind are rather the dominant, we also need a huge capacity of the battery electricity storage in order to help that demand-supply matching in every time. And the capacity of the battery in this scenario will amount to almost 40% of the battery capacity, which is needed for mobilities. So this is rather a huge amount. And under these scenarios, the challenge might be how much capacity of the solar can we employ in 2050? Because we are suffering from the restriction coming from the shortage of land area. The Ministry of the Environment in Japan is making an assessment of the installation capacity of the solar, and the ceiling would be something like 700 gigawatt, which is close to our capacity of the solar in the renewable-oriented scenario. And this particular survey is assuming that the 20% of the total farming area will be converted to the solar farm. So this is rather the challenging scenario. And even though we are trying to preserve the nuclear plant to be a capacity of the 46 gigawatt, still we have a huge capacity needed to sustain our power grid in this renewable-oriented scenario. So the consideration might be, how can we reduce this capacity of the solar? And one clue might be, in reference to this resource potential of the wind, excuse me, and especially the wind offshore power generation, we may be able to rely more on the wind. That's why we have made some sensitivity survey by reducing the cost assumption of the offshore wind solar drastically to this value. And that resulted in the significant reduction of the necessary solar capacity by more than 100 gigawatt. This is tremendous. While the increase of the offshore wind is much smaller than the reduced capacity of the wind. And this is also accompanied by the reduction in the necessary capacity of the onshore wind. This is also a difficult technology for installation. So the potential of the offshore wind might be considered more. And the reason why we can save the capacity of the PV by installing more capacity of the offshore wind is depicted here as a chart depicting the electricity demand by dotted lines and also the electricity supply by this field area. And in the scenario where the use of the fuel firing power generation is more prevalent by hydrogen and ammonia, then the power supply at the nighttime will be mostly by the hydrogen firing power generation. While in the renewable-oriented scenario, we have a huge amount of the curtailment of the PV power generation, and we need to shift the daytime electricity to the nighttime by using the huge capacity of the battery electricity storage. And when we introduce more capacity of the offshore wind, we can expect more power generation during the nighttime and also the cloudy and rainy day. So the necessity of the solar capacity in daytime is much reduced. That is why, by employing more offshore wind, we can tremendously save the capacity of the necessary PV. And even though we rely on such a large amount of the renewables, still we need to rely on the fuel-firing power generation to stabilize the power grid. In order to meet such a large capacity or even a moderate capacity of the fuel-firing power generation in 2050 in the decarbonized manner, we need to use either hydrogen or ammonia in a CO2-free manner, produced in a CO2-free manner to power those fuel-firing power generation. And depending on the scenario, the transition pathway might be slightly different, but largely speaking, in the early stage towards 2030, we will try to introduce more renewable and phase out the coal as much as possible by substituting that coal with the renewable power generation. And after that, unfortunately, the direct jump to the 100% firing of the hydrogen and ammonia is not technically feasible or foreseeable at this stage. So we need to make rather gradual transition using co-firing technology between the fossil resources and hydrogen and ammonia. That necessitates some time by increasing the fraction of the hydrogen and ammonia step by step toward the 2045, especially for the case of the combination between LNG and hydrogen. And after that, we will then substitute the existing co-firing power generators with the new one, which combust the 100% hydrogen and ammonia. And during such a transition stage, it is very important to support the fast movers to try the co-firing technology. Here is the sub-schematic picture depicting the decline of the hydrogen ammonia price toward 2050 and possible rise in the fossil fuel price coupled with the carbon pricing as an example here. And at this early stage, we need to fill in the gap by some subsidization. So we calculate the total amount of the necessary budget to make it possible to support the fast movers who are trying to facilitate the introduction of the hydrogen and ammonia. And our estimation is rather optimistic, showing that the amount of the budget to make all such a subsidization is not so huge. So it will be a realistic consideration, I think. And next is the chemical industry transition. The characteristic of the chemical industry is that the variety of the products. So we have a variety of the basic chemicals, and all of them are currently coming from the fossil resource. And in the decarbonized chemical industry in 2050, the picture might be more diversified. The carbon resource to sustain these basic chemical products is not only the fossil resources, which amount is much reduced in 2050, but also the carbon is coming from the waste as a recycling route. And also, some carbon should come from air, either via biomass or even the air-captured CO2, upon a combination with the green hydrogen. And especially for this carbon route coming from the air, CO2, we need to inject a large amount of the electricity to make it possible to supply the green hydrogen by water electrolysis and also direct air capture of the CO2 to produce the green methanol as a chemical feedstock. So we need to think about how to secure this air captured carbon oriented green methanol. And if we try to secure all the hydrogen in Japan, which is necessary to sustain such a chemical industry as an example, and also the fuel firing power generation in the previous slide, we need tremendous amount of the electricity for making it possible to decarbonize Japan in 2050. And by thinking about the land area which is necessary to produce such a large amount of the electricity by renewable pathways, we need to also think about the importing those hydrogen-related resources from overseas countries. And here are some examples of such a global supply chain of the green energy source and also the materials from overseas countries. Currently, we are importing all the fossil originated resources from the foreign countries. And in 2050, as we have presented, the resources will not be just a fossil resource, but rather relying on the green hydrogen and also the CO2 captured from air. And the converting these resources to either the hydrogen carrier or the methanol as a chemical product necessitate huge energy. And in our natural condition of Japan, it's not so easy to secure such abundant renewable resources. Actually, the renewable energy is probably just used for the direct electricity supply in Japan. So it will be my idea to shift the most upstream process of such an industry from Japan to other countries, which is more abundant with the solar resources and also around the area. So this picture is an example to sustain the remaining chemical industrial processes in Japan while shifting the most energy-intensive upstream processes to the overseas countries. And another consideration might be the electrification. And in Japan, already the air conditioning is well shifted to the heat pump because we need already the cooling. But the hot water supply for bathing is still relying on the natural gas. This is because the power supply density is much different between the heat pump and the existing gas firing water heater. So the challenge might be to enhance the power intensity of the existing heat pump so that it can be stored in a very, very small housing in Japan. And also, Japanese buildings have a lot of the cogeneration, which is very energy efficient, but using the natural gas. So the challenge might be to substitute the natural gas with the CO2-free hydrogen, which necessitates the moderate scale hydrogen firing turbines and or the high temperature fuel cells, and also the equipment for the supplying the hydrogen to those urban area is very critical. And finally, I'd briefly point out the necessity of considering the IT sectors. The energy demand in the IT sector is expected to expand in a tremendous manner. And estimation will include a lot of the ambiguity, but we will probably expect close to 20% rise in the electricity demand in 2050 just by IT sector. So the how to save the electricity demand in IT sector, or in other words, how to make the IT technology more energy efficient would be a very critical pathway and challenge. So let me summarize what I have taught this time. The net zero Japan can be achieved by a well-balanced energy mix consisting of the renewable electricity and CO2-free fuels and nuclear. And the current energy system, which heavily relies on fossil fuel, must be transformed to a new energy system that uses an optimal combination of the electricity and the hydrogen ammonia and carbon neutral fuel, and some restrained use of the CCS. And for this realization, we need to promote more offshore wind installation and also the substitution of the fossil fuel with the CO2-free fuel, especially for power generation and heavy industry. And for that purpose, probably we need to develop the global supply chain of the green resources, such as the hydrogen, CO2, and direct capture resources. And of course, the policy and financial action is very important. Probably we will need close to 1 to 2% of the GDP every year to sustain this transition. And also, the subsidization of CO2-free fuel is very important, as accompanied by carbon pricing. And the government initiative to install offshore wind and infrastructures for the CO2-free fuel supply chain and resource supply chain in a global scale might be very important. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Suniyama Wamasa. Very well done in such a short time frame. So really appreciate it. Now we want to move on to the panel discussion. So why don't you, yeah. A little bit. Very well. Thank you, everyone. And actually, the real meat of this discussion, the session is really the panel discussion. As I said, we are doing this exercise to really try to chart the pathway, but we really would like to learn from the global experience and also want to contribute to that global discourse of what kind of pathway we should chart. So to have this discussion, we have a wonderful panelist here. That starting with Lord Adele Turner is the CEO of the Energy Transitions Commission, and we have been partnering with the ETC for some time, actually from the beginning to learn from the global thinking. Then we have Fabi Tumiwa from Indonesia, who is the CEO of or Executive Director of Institute for Essential Services Reform. He's a central figure to drive the energy transition discussion in Indonesia. Then we have Kahori Miyake, the co-chair of JCLP, Japan Climate Leaders Partnership, who is also driving that the energy transition discussion in Japan. Then the lastly but not the least, we have now the representative of youth that she is that Himena Miyashita is at the University of Tokyo student and representing, I hope, that the next generation's voice. So with this very interesting panel, let's kick off the discussion. I want to start with Adele, because you also have to leave a little bit earlier. So what's your take that you have been with us for 3 years? What's your honest and feedback on what we have been doing here?
It's great to be Hi. Yes, it's great to be with ETI-GCC again. The Energy Transition Commission is a global coalition of companies, mainly, and some expert groups and universities across the world, committed to working out the technologies which can get us to a net zero global economy by 2050. And throughout our work, we have combined global work with work in specific countries. We've done extensive work in China, in India, and in Australia, and we were therefore very pleased 3 years ago to have the opportunity to work with Naoko and the Center for Global Commons at a University of Tokyo to work on the Japanese specific challenges. One of the things that we always try to focus on in the ETC work is to understand where there are technologies and developments which are likely to be common across the world, and where you have to tailor the path, design the path specifically to zero carbon for local circumstances. Now, there are some things in which I think Japan is no different from any other country in the world. And let me tell you what I think those are. I think road transport is going to go battery electric to a far greater extent than most people yet realize. The internal combustion engine is dead. We just haven't buried it yet, but it's dead because electric engines are better. But those electric engines are going to be almost entirely battery electric. Even at the heavy duty truck level, we are now seeing 44 tons electric trucks out there in the market before the fuel cell electric trucks. So it's going battery electric on a big way. There may be a role for hydrogen, but it will be limited to the really heavy truck sector. That's number one. In heating, Masa talked, and it's been a great pleasure to work, I must say, with Masa over the last few years. Masa talked about the heating sector. We are very sure that the predominant answer to the future of residential heating, and residential cooking and residential hot water is electric in various forms. Heat pumps are just a fundamentally superior technology which deliver a kilowatt hour of heat into the house with only a quarter of a kilowatt hour of electricity input into them. This is a huge improvement in energy efficiency. There may be particular circumstances where they're difficult to supply, but this is a major technology. And by the way, a technology where Japanese manufacturing companies are absolutely at the fore of technological development and manufacturing, often building off their air conditioning units, because remember that an air conditioner and a heat pump are exactly the same thing, just pointed round the other way. Indeed, the best versions of them are bidirectional heat pumps, which you can use both for heating and air conditioning. One other thing where Japan will be the same as everywhere else is how do you decarbonize the steel sector? Again, we are going to move away from coking coal, metallurgical coal. We are going to move probably to hydrogen in a large role, maybe to a role for methane and various smelt technologies combined with carbon capture and storage. But we see a world in which the demand for coking coal, metallurgical coal, could fall and should fall 90% by 2050. And in those areas of the technology, I see no difference between Japan and the rest of the world. But what we find in all of our work is that when you get to the power sector and the role of renewables, you have to look carefully at the local renewable resource. And it varies hugely. In Indonesia, as Fabi will talk about later, there is, and it was his research institute which illustrated this, lots and lots of solar resource. In my country, the UK, and in Northwest Europe in general, offshore wind will play a major role. So whenever I go to Japan or to any other country, I want to understand what is different there. Japan does have less solar potential than some other countries. I've been to Japan. It isn't sunny every single day in Japan. It's rather British in its weather sometimes. You're good on rain, like we're rather good on rain. The onshore wind speeds are tricky. The mountainous environment makes that difficult. And the crucial issue is offshore wind, where the issue is not the resource. The offshore wind resource off the shores of Japan is massive. It is how deep the shores are. And I have to say, Naoko knows I joke about this. I can't speak Japanese, and therefore I have to rely in meetings in Japan on interpretation, translation. But in the middle of most discussions I have in Japan about the electricity system, there's something where I know already exactly what the person has said, because halfway through them telling me about the power system, they make the following sign. And I know what they're saying is that the Japanese mountains go down deeply into the sea and that there isn't a continental shelf and that that deep water makes offshore wind difficult. It does at the moment, but my gut feel is that we are going to dramatically reduce the costs of floating offshore, which you can deploy in deep water, and that may be transformational for Japan in the long term. If that is not the case, then Japan will have to have either a greater role for nuclear than other countries or a greater role for some of these imported forms of energy, either hydrogen or ammonia. All countries, I think, will need a small amount of their system, which is what is called thermal dispatchable plants, plants which you can switch on and off, and which we then make zero carbon, either because we apply carbon capture and storage or because we convert them to hydrogen. I have to say clearly that across most of the world, ammonia burning in coal-fired power stations is unlikely to play a significant role at all. So Japan, if it looks as that, has to be aware that it is developing a technology which I think has almost no export market to the rest of the world. And I have some doubts about it. I think what we will see across the whole of the world is people continuing to use gas turbine fleets and either adding CCS or converting them to hydrogen. And I must say the only thing I disagree with Massa on is that hydrogen gas turbines are not yet ready. They have not yet been certified. But I had this discussion with Massa the other day, and quite by chance, as I flew over here on my British Airways flight on Thursday, I was sitting next to a major expert on gas turbines. a man who really knows about gas turbines, and he says they can create 100% burning hydrogen gas turbines immediately. The reason why they're not yet certified is the difficulty of getting sufficient hydrogen supply to run them for long enough to go through the certification processes and to proving that they will work over long-term periods of time. But they've already shown it for what are called derivative, aeroderivative gas turbines, the ones that go on aircraft, and they say this is not a problem. They know it's not a problem. So that is certainly going to be an option. But let me finally say it's been an absolute delight to work with Naoko and with Masa on this excellent work, really trying to work out the practical ways to a zero carbon Japanese economy, which takes account of all the global trends in technologies, but also thinks deeply about how this is going to work within the specific circumstances of Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adele. I know you got to leave in 3 minutes to make a comment to the present, the UAE COP presidency. Yeah, but let's move on to Fabian. Because we are really interested in how the discussion in Indonesia has been changing because of new findings, the new technologies. So Fabian, you have the floor.
Thank you. Now I'm Fabi Tumiwa from IESR, Institute for Essential Services Reform. So we are working on energy policy and climate policy in Indonesia. So I think it's very interesting to what has been presented in Japan net zero emission. IESR has been done also modeling to look at the pathways of Indonesia net zero emission. So we did that back in 2021, and we are currently updating our result as well to incorporate the latest technologies. But since we published our report, there is a couple of international organizations that work together with Indonesian government also to publish the roadmap for Indonesia Indonesia net zero emission, right? So IRENA published the report last year, IEA also last year, I think, and we come with a quite similar conclusions that it is the most cost-effective for Indonesia to reach net zero emissions is to utilize our renewable energy potentials. So that the most cost-effective. Our study indicated that it is actually technically and economically viable to become 100% renewable by 2050 or 2060 in the government context, in the government target. IRENA report, if you can look that IRENA Indonesia Energy Transition Outlook 2022 also come with similar conclusions, right? And IEA report also quite similar to that. What makes difference, I think, the compositions of the share of renewable energy. Our study look at the economy-wide. So it's covered not only power sector, but also power industries and transport. IRENA also did the same, as well as IEA. In terms of resources, I think what makes us different than Japan, that Indonesia is quite rich with renewable energy resources. So we have a solar, we have wind, we have geothermal, we have hydro, we have biomass, we have even ocean energy, which I think I can say that Indonesia is renewable energy, rich with renewable energy resources. If we look at the official figures, actually before 2021 is very interesting, because at the time, government official figures say that renewable energy potential in Indonesia is around 500 gigawatt, less than 500 gigawatt. And if you look at the solar potential, it's even only 207 gigawatt at that time. So until 2021, we came up with the first, I think, a study on looking at solar potential in Indonesia using GIS-based system and look at the based on the space available. So we will not put that solar, for instance, in the forests or in the agricultural land, but we look at available land, right? So we come up with a quite high number, actually. Our numbers show that Indonesia has a solar based on land availability is 3,400 up to almost 20,000 gigawatt. So when we presented this to government, the government take a look at the study and actually use, they want to verify. So they assign the research unit of Ministry of Energy Mineral Resources to replicate that study, right? Using the methodology and come up with the minimum resources is actually quite similar, 3,200 gigawatt. So since then, if you look at the Indonesia, again, official figure, the end of 2021, it's totally changed. Now the government say, okay, our renewable energy resources is 3,600 gigawatt and solar 3,400, and the rest is geothermal, hydro, biomass, wind, and others. Why it is very, very important? Because the perception of the resource availability changed the dynamic of whether it is possible for us to reach net zero emission by 2050 or 2060. And I think it's also open up for debate, like what kind of technology we should harness in order to meet this goal, and what is the most cost effective. Because if you look at Indonesia, right, we are still considered a poor country, not like Japan. Our average income per capita is like $4,000, right? Our electricity consumption in average per capita 1,362. I think Japan is way that, right? So it means that for Indonesia, which unlike Japan, we still have high electricity growth in the near future as our economic growth, as our income growth. So we also look at this when we did kind of the modeling work to look at what the future looks like for electricity sector in Indonesia, right? So the government come up with like 5,000 kilowatt hour per capita by 2050. We come up with even higher number, 6,500 kilowatt hour per capita by 2050. So it's see that so we need a lot of renewable energy actually, and based on that study, we found that it's actually possible and even cost effective compared to the other options. Recently, the utilities, and I have to say with the support of Japan, tried to introduce ammonia co-firing. Well, I think we have done some initial analysis to look at what is actually more cost effective, ammonia co-firing or retire the coal plants. Well, when it comes to retirement age, and replace that with renewables. If it's like variable renewable, solar plus battery, like so, we look at this and we come up with a conclusion that actually more cost effective to combine solar and storage actually rather than coal with ammonia co-firing, right? It's more costly in that sense. And I think if you look at the study done by BNEF for Japanese ammonia co-firing, it's indicated, right, that it will be viable only if you have carbon pricing above $300 per ton. So you can imagine if we in the same in Indonesia, we have to bear that cost. So it's not feasible in that sense. We also done an analysis to look at, okay, so what will be the option if we have a coal plants combined with carbon capture and storage, which also Japanese proposed to Indonesia, right? So we look at that, well, it turns out that it will only viable if we have carbon pricing above $130 per ton. So again, it will increase the electricity price. So it's become problematic for Indonesia economy, which though still need to grow. We still have a lot of poor people, right? So you can see that different options that we have looked at based on the current situations, right? That actually maintaining current fossil fuel generation is not feasible. It's not cost effective, and it's only lead to the energy insecurity and will really have impact on the affordability to Indonesia citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. That is such a rich input and really sparked the conversation. It's I'm so happy to have your voice on this discussion. So now let us move on to Kaori. You must have a lot to say. because
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm Kahori Miyake. I co-chair network, company network called Japan Climate Leaders Partnership. This is a coalition where Japanese companies come together to lead the way to decarbonization. And we work very hard to towards this goal. Thank you, Hemi, for the presentation. And I also would like to thank Professor Sugiyama for the great presentation. It's very nice to hear that there's been a lot of talk about how Japan is unique and that we have to have a unique pathway towards global decarbonization, which is true, which is probably true. And that's why Naoko Sensei is doing this work. And we, from a Japanese corporation point of view, that is very helpful because we do business in Japan, and it's very important that we have a ground where we know that it is aligned with the global target, but also a feasible one in Japan. So having said that, there's two things that from a private sector point of view, which is very important, that we have a foreseeable projection of the country, of the nation, how we are going through the road. And that's what is very important for us, because we as a private sector, as a private company, also have to make our midterm and long-term goals for our own business. And if we don't know what's going to happen in the Japanese market in like 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we won't be able to make that projection as well. So in order for our companies to make that midterm and long-term goals, we have to know where the Japanese market is going to be in 2030, 2040, and 2050. What is the mix and what is the price? The other thing that I want to touch was the cost. You talked about a lot of cost. Thank you for that. It is the same for Japan as well. We have to have a competitive price in the energy. We have to have, it's one thing to say technologically it's feasible. Yes, co-firing and other different solutions. And I don't have the knowledge to judge every single technology, so I don't know. And it's one thing to say we can do technology, it's available, but it's another thing to say it's cost effective. Is it competitive enough to do that? That is very important for private sector. Is it competitive? Because we're, at the end of the day, we're competing with the companies outside of the Japan. And we all know that the most cost-effective energy or electricity in 2030, or even today probably, is solar, and wind will be the next. So we're competing with these cost-effective energies outside of Japan. And it's one thing to say, well, Japan doesn't have the resource, but then the companies will have to go to find that competitive energy source. So in order for us to be competitive in Japan, we have to find a way it's renewable, or it's cost effective, or it's carbon neutral. So that's two things that we look at in Japan. And we all know that it seems like with the study that Sugiyama Sensei has just presented, that it's available. It will be available in Japan, which is a good news for us, so that we can stay in Japan and we can be very competitive in 2030 and 4050.
Kahori-san, thank you so much. I know Professor Sugiyama. Okay. May want to jump in, but could you please hold? We have to have one round of the discussion here. But as you already mentioned, our assumption is basically to keep it competitive, to keep our economy competitive. And that was the kind of, assumption of the study, which is actually proven to be the true. And also, you mentioned the renewable may be the cheapest, but if that other international market actually started to see the carbon components of the product, it will actually affect the competitiveness a lot. So it's very, very important to keep our economy decarbonized. So before we open up the floor, let's move on to the last speaker, Himena, that you are studying the international collaboration, and also you represent the voice of youth. So the people talk a lot about just transition, and the just means a lot. The just is sometimes within a country, among countries, but another just is just among generations. So that I hope that you represent that the future generation. And from your point of view, what's your view? That what are we doing? Is that are we doing something useful? Yeah, I would like to hear from you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm a student at the University of Tokyo, and I've been invited to represent the voice of the youth. So what I've done is to try to talk to a lot of people from my university as well, in order to figure out what the consensus on the youth are and what we believe about energy transition as well. And as Professor has mentioned, just transition is also a very important thing that links to energy transition. And justness is really about listening to all stakeholders. So we have different distinguished speakers today from different sectors, but we also have to also listen to the voice of the youth. And I think the first thing that the youth would say in regards to this wonderful proposal, very detailed proposal that tells us that that net zero Japan by 2050 is possible, that the youth would say, what's next? What can we do next? Or how is this policy going to be, how is this proposal going to be implemented? And so I think the youth, as you may all know, we do like to see very tangible results and very tangible activities. And so a lot of people might say, oh, like, where are the tangible policies from the government? Is there a percentage of the GDP being allocated to energy transition? But at the same time, personally, I do understand that proposals like these, energy transition is a very difficult topic. There are so many different things we have to consider, for example, are people being displaced when we take over, when we convert land into producing renewable energy? Are there people going to be having to reskill and change their jobs? Or do we have to consider all the other social factors? Do people socially accept these proposals? And so there are so many questions that we have to answer. And because of how complex the issue is, I think my proposal or my idea is that the youth have so many ideas, but we feel like we need tangible activities, and a lot of youth are getting quite upset that there are no tangible actions. But the reality is that I think once we bridge the gap between the upper generations and the youth and allow for communication channels for the youth to actually participate in all these discussions and to actually even propose policies within the government, to be more part of the decision-making process, I think the youth will be more aware of the difficulties of implementing policies. So for example, on the surface, we might want, for example, a land to be converted into renewable energy, but maybe in the sidelines, governments or other sectors are actually working in the background, negotiating with landowners. And because the youth are quite separated from all these processes, we don't really understand that if these processes are going on, we don't know it. So what I really propose is that the youth and the upper generations collaborate together. This has been done, for example, in New Zealand. The Green Party has opened up a youth green And my friend is part of this association, so she has told me about this. But this is basically a party where they listen to the youth and they involve youth in the policymaking processes. And I think if this could be done in Japan, this would be really great. So I have spoken to my friends from Climate Youth Japan or Japanese Youth Platform on Sustainability, who have also shared on their hopes that Japan would have this opportunity to integrate more youth into the decision-making process, and have more youth more involved in policymaking. Yeah, my friends are over there. So I think if we have all these initiatives, I think there would be less misunderstanding between the upper generations and the youth. And in this way, we can also ensure just transition, because we're listening to all the stakeholders who are really part of this energy transition. And as long as we, really listen to each and every person and have everybody considered, then energy transition will be more just and it will be more efficient as well. And therefore, I think as a summary, the youth's vision for the future, I guess, is to have a more collaborative approach between governments, business sectors, and the youth. And of course, in Japan, an issue right now is that there aren't actually a lot of social awareness on climate change, or there's a lack of climate change awareness as compared to other countries. So what a lot of the people like me or the people, youth delegates of Japan here, are trying to do is to really spread this word to more youth, so that more and more youth would be able to, participate in all these proposals and government policy making. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, wow. First and foremost, we need to have a green party before we integrate the voice of the youth into the policy making. But anyway, thank you so much for bringing those elements, that what kind of the policy change, social change are needed, because it's not only, you just mentioned that not only energy transition, it's really more like a social transition, and it needs to be really supported by not only by the government, but the entire society. So that how to create that kind of fabrics, that it seems extremely important. So based on that, before I open up the floor to the audience, I just also want to ask maybe one question to both Fabi and Kahori about actually policy issues. That 2 years ago at the Glasgow COP, ADB-led energy transition mechanism was launched. And the ceremonially, your finance minister was there. And basically she said, this energy transition is not a simple thing. It's an entire industrial policy change, entire social structure change. And it's more like a social contract with government and the people. Then but this ETM is not kind of being developed to more like a JET-P, just energy transition in partnership. So from your point of view, what that kind of mechanism of global coordination and the international coordination mechanism, which really try to address, help the transition, is this working, not working? And if not working, what we should do differently?
Well, first of all, I think for country to be successful in conducting energy transition, like Indonesia in particular, emerging economy, so we need like international collaborations. And it's in three areas. First is that we need investment, and that's the role of investment for other country, of private sectors in the country or from outside the country. Foreign direct investment is very, very important. Second is that access to the technology, because number of the technology that currently exists is actually in the global market, that it's being developed. They are not there in Indonesia yet, and I think we need to speed up that technology adoptions into the energy system through the investment. And the third one is the capacity building, because, for instance, planning for your power system, right? How can we make sure that when the higher level penetration of variable renewable energy, when it's there, our power system is ready. So I think it requires long-term planning, but no one in Indonesia, in my opinion, has the experience dealing with such system, right? So we need to learn from other countries, from other experts, I think, to help us plan and develop our power system to be able to ready for high level renewable energy penetrations, right? That one. Back to your question about ETM. Yes, it's been launched last year, and the COP 26 mid of last year, during the G20 presidency of Indonesia, we already established energy transition mechanism country platform. So basically is a coordinating mechanism to embed the energy transition mechanism into our governance system. It managed by PT SMI. Is one of the financial institutions under Ministry of Finance. And in addition to that, in addition to ADB initial fund, we also received $500 million climate investment fund. There are two projects that last year being announced to be as a pilot for this ETM in Indonesia. First is PLNs, our utility Pelabuhan Ratu coal-fired power plant, 1,100 megawatt. And another one, I think around 600 megawatt of Cirebon coal-fired power plant. I think I bring the good news that I think one of the transaction will be announced maybe tomorrow in Indonesia Pavilion. If you come to Indonesia Pavilion tomorrow, I think around 10:30, you will hear the announcement of one of this project. So that's the result. But learning from this process, because ISR, my organization, also involved in the JETP. So we are part of the technical working group that actually conducted the analysis of how Indonesia can meet JETP target, right? And but also from our experience, we know that it's not easy when it comes that to increase renewable energy share in the power system. And ETM is only power system, right? Not the entire energy sector, only power, right? We need to retire at least in our calculation 8 gigawatt of coal plants before 2030, because JETP target is 2030. The initial JETP target is emission peak power sector 290 million ton and 34% renewable energy by 2030. So we have done some calculations to show that it has to be like 8 gigawatts. Around 8 gigawatt of coal plants need to be retired in order to accommodate that higher renewable energy capacity. The challenge is that most of this coal fleet are actually quite young. So retire them early require a lot of financing. With the current ETM finance is not enough, right? Even if you look at the JETP, and I think that's one of the issue, right? In the JETP, we have in the investment priority area is the coal retirement. Before it was put 5 gigawatt. But at the end, if you look at the comprehensive investment policy plan, the 5 gigawatt is gone because there is no financing available under JETP. And so it is big challenge. And also we have estimated, I think, with the JETP to reach that renewable energy mix by 2030, emission peak, again, we need $97 billion. And the JETP financing commitment only $21 billion. So there is a huge financing gap.
All right.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, so just go on to Kaori. You are now working for international financial system or bank. So from your point of view, how the transition finance or actually financial sector can help, not just Indonesia, not just Japan, but this transition. What are the key role that the financial sector can help or promote this transition?
Thank you. That's a very difficult question, and which I probably don't have the answer. But as Fabi was saying, yes, we do not have the finance ready. It's not enough. It's not enough. That's what people talk about. Being in the financial sector and looking the problem from the finance sector, I think there's a couple things that we should be doing is that we should be more discussing, defining what the transition means. People just say transition, and to me, it's like it looks like people are using the same word transition, but having a different thoughts of transition. We have to be more specific. It's time to be more specific to say, okay, this is transition. Is you say retiring coal power plant? Fine. How are we going to retire the coal-fired power plants? Who's gonna bear which part? Who's gonna take the risk? That's why we have JP and private, public, and a lot of people told me that nowadays you call philosophy is another P, is a PPP. So there's different people can take different risks, and different people have different expectations in return. So let's just sit down and talk about the exact who can do what, and stop just going talk about the ideas. It's more about concrete. Okay, who's going to take what? It's about time for this. So that's what I kind of get from these days, couple days.
I cannot agree more on that. Yeah. So maybe only less than 10 minutes left. So I just want to also open the floor. And also I understand that the ETI-CGC, the member companies or representative are either joining here or actually through the screen. Can we get them? Oh, good. Yeah. There are a few representatives of the member companies. And I just would like to maybe ask that your contribution on a few things. Adele mentioned quite precisely what kind of potential contribution Japan could do from a technological progress point of view, and maybe also social public point of view. And if you, any of you could join us, that then what would be the Japanese contribution to net zero pathway challenge? I would very much welcome your thoughts. Maybe could you raise hands if possible?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Kaita-san.
Thank you very much. Mr. Professor Sugiyama, thank you very much for your very, very continuous and very thorough study for the carbon neutrality of Japan. And I believe depending on the country and depending on the situation, depending on the people, the carbon neutral most efficient method is quite different. For example, in Japan, not only the area for the suitable for the solar panel or offshore power windmill, but also maybe we also have the earthquake or typhoon. So maybe just in case, just for the installation of the solar panel, we have to maybe strengthen the structure of that, and maybe that is sometimes not so cost effective or competitive compared with the other countries. So maybe each station, we also have to think of which is more efficient, either or we by ourselves in our land to get the regenerative energy, or sometimes some carbon neutral energy should be imported from the other areas. At that time, maybe if we import some energy from some foreign countries, not only the effectiveness of the usage of the energy, but also to carry or to store such energy efficiency is very, very important. But anyway, such a maybe in case the ammonium or maybe carbon neutral fuel or such kind of thing is anyway, we have to create the hydrogen, and how to effectively create and continuously maybe in very high durability to continue to create the very good quality hydrogen. Maybe we can I think, contribute to the other countries. So maybe we like to maybe cooperate with such a country which have the regenerative energy abundant. And then maybe instead of that, maybe we can get some regenerative or maybe a carbon neutral energy from them. And that is the, I think they are very good cooperative maybe style of the international. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kaita-san from Toyota. Is there anybody jumping in? I saw the hands coming from, is that Kaneko-san?
Yes, thank you. This is Kaneko from SMBC, and because we previously had a discussion around financing, I would like to make a brief comment that financing, our role is really the commercializing and scaling the new technology. That's the key role for financing. And as Professor Sugiyama presented on page 10, for example, the price gap support currently discussed at the Japanese METI around hydrogen and ammonia is pretty much important. And also the role of the carbon pricing seems to be very important to really make it work and scale the new businesses associated to the new technology. And my question to Professor Sugiyama is that based on this analysis this time, how we should understand the risks associated with the carbon pricing. That's one comment or the question to Professor Sugiyama from me. And another one is that if a financer like SMBC Group, we try to expand sustainable financing, we tend to handle those financing with non-financial KPIs and so on. Or in order to really expand those sustainable financing, we really have to somewhat verify the viability or consistency or quality of those non-financial KPIs attached to those sustainable financing. And in Europe, for example, Luxembourg may be having an established what is called Lux flag, which is the financing labeling agency, which really have to which really label the impact responsible financing. So we may be potentially be discussing such a proof of the quality of non-financial KPIs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaneko-san. Actually, I was told 3 more minutes left. So I think we cannot endure or entertain this big question that's important. But before I close, let's make sure nobody from the floor. Okay, so the one question from next generation. And I also would like to ask that Himena for the last words, but also that if the Professor Sugiyama could come in very briefly, that in next 3 minutes, that would be good. We can entertain this financial question because it's going to be the next phase of this study. So we may have plenty of time to discuss that because it's such a big topic. But then the Master or Professor Sugiyama, please come in, and then we go to the floor.
Okay, so me first, right?
Yes.
Okay,
you
good.
first.
And just very briefly answering to the question by Kaneko-san, the risk might be of course, the very, how to say naively, the rise of the energy cost. So that needs to be, how to say, the mitigated or the managed in the entire society. So it's a very global question, I think. And also, my large comment is that, yes, I like renewable electricity. So we need to introduce as much renewable electricity as possible in every country, I think, right? But the decarbonization needs the combination of the technology. This is also the very important consideration. For example, for electricity, we cannot sustain our power grid only by renewables and battery. This is our technological, how to say, the scientific knowledge. So we need to also think about some early introduction of the supply chain of the carbon-free fuel, right, to sustain our decarbonized energy system. That is not denying any trial to disseminate the renewables, but my point is that we need a good combination and also the early trial to try those uncultivated technologies such as the carbon neutral fuel or carbon-free fuel to jump into our energy system. So we need a very elaborate and wise consideration to make the entire portfolio possible. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Masa. Then I want to come to you. Maybe you could say your name.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. My name is Yoriko Ashimine and I'm from Japan. I'm from Climate View Japan. And I would like to support Jimena. As a youth, I feel if I were you, like all of others like adults, I feel for you a lot. And I would like to support the idea of youth council and to give more information about it. So to achieve energy transition, we need to consider and we need to understand that the most important group that should be empowered are the youths. Why? Because we youth are the most affected generation. And according to IPCC, they also enhances that we youths are the most, affected groups. So actually you have mentioned that it's kind of difficult in Japan to kind of implement. I mean, you were like kind of, okay, we have like, yeah, it's like we have a lot to do in like changing policies. But what I want to highlight is that actually 70% of OECD countries has their own youth council. And EU also has its own youth advisory. And G7 also has their own youth advisory. Japan, why don't we have one, right? So let's, team up with CYJ, create youth council in Japan, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just to clarify, I've never said that we shouldn't have a youth.
I'm sorry, like it seems like
it's more,
there's like a lot of obstacle how you reacted, so I'm sorry.
Really, actually, I do support that idea. Okay,
Thanks.
so the final words from Jimena.
Okay, final verse, very, very short. Oh, can I? Okay. I think about finance as well. Maybe I would like to say, as youth, as a person who is looking for a job, who has been looking for jobs, one thing I would like to tell businesses as well is that a lot of youth these days are looking at what kind of things the company is doing for sustainability. And even if it's not a company that is directly related to a sustainable cause, we are also looking at the ways that you are, working towards electrification of your buildings, or sourcing your energy from renewable sources, or if you're investing in sustainable energy. And so I guess I want to emphasize to businesses that a lot of youth who are looking for jobs are also looking at this. So it is very important for businesses to also change now and also contribute to financing. As we have said, finance is a very important factor in implementing energy transition and in helping countries like Indonesia or even Japan to achieve net zero in the future. And so on top of financing, I think in general, I would like to say it is all about collaboration. As the other speakers have said, it's always about talking to all the different stakeholders, always thinking about other people, and how in the international context, how Japan can think of how to help other nations into kind of exporting its ideas and technologies, as we see in the exhibitions here. And then Japan would then have to rely on other countries for hydrogen and carbon-free fuel. And so that is on the international context. And then on the local context, we have to think about all the youth and all the other different private sectors and businesses who are all converging towards a more sustainable future. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimena. It's really a nice way of concluding this very lively discussion. I'm totally impressed with the quality of the conversation. So how perception change by technology and data and analysis. That both of you emphasize the importance of science-based strategy, but also that the mechanism to how to implement those transitions, so that this inclusiveness, that a blended finance kind of scheme, a lot we can do, and apparently this openness to see things through that clear eyes to think about future generation seems extremely important, and this openness for the conversation is something we shouldn't really miss. So thank you so much for the audience. Thank you so much for the lively conversation. And we want to continue to work for this, and we will come back next year again with an additional further work. So thanks a lot, and have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
I should have mentioned thank you for the panel. That was great.
Thank you.